it doesn't surprise me one iota that young women are liberal, but it does surprise me that young men are now becoming conservative in greater numbers than I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, it does and it doesn't. It doesn't because I follow politics for a living and I've seen what the left has done to young men. So I see it's a natural gravitation. But what do you think that that's what's caused it? And if so, why aren't young women open to that? You know, we've seen some young women start to vote Trump with the Trump hats. I tend to believe, maybe I'm totally wrong, this is completely anecdotal, but I tend to believe they see these young men who are very pro-Trump with the hat, and it's kind of cool, and they like the guys wearing those hats, and they like what those guys are saying and the way they're acting, and it's a natural aphrodisiac. And so next thing you know, those women have the hat on, and they're open-minded, and they're hearing it discussed.
Okay. Let's delve into that a little bit. First of all, I think it's happening to young men. I think that the podcast crowd has had a fair bit to do with that. And I think the reason for that is that that's the only place that young men find encouragement. And that encouragement, I've been struck to the core in my travels and my encounters with thousands of people or tens of thousands of people, many of them young men, how little encouragement is enough. None is not enough. Some is enough. And they've got some encouragement from the podcast sphere world, and that's enough. Now, why not young women? Well, Megyn, one of the mistakes that pollsters make is assuming that 16-year-old boys or 18-year-old boys, let's say, and 18-year-old girls inhabit the same world. They don't, because worldwide, women prefer men who are about 4 years older. And I would say that proclivity is even more pronounced in early, in the teen years and in the early 20s. So I think we should be matching young men against girls who are 4 years younger, not the same age. So we'll see how that plays out, in the upcoming years. So that would be the first thing. It is also not obvious to me that the conservative types have done a particularly good job of communicating with young women. Now, there's a bunch of reasons for that, like the 18 to 34-year-old female crowd gravitates not towards YouTube and the longer form content that at least once was the hallmark of YouTube, but to these more pathological social worlds. Tumblr was one of them. Wherever you get a large aggregation of young women who are unsupervised, let's say, or unmentored, that's a better way of thinking about it, look the hell out, because that's a breeding ground for social pathology. And young women get a lot of their information, I think it's 60 to 70% from TikTok.
I know, it's terrifying.
And TikTok is a complete bloody snake pit, and the Chinese and the Iranians and the Russians have a major hand in that. And so that's not good.
This is one of the main reasons I'm on TikTok, as a show, as a content creator. Right. I want my voice out there, and I want people to hear me and my message, just especially young women, to hear there's another way, and there are different ways of thinking about this. But I think about the Trump election, Jordan. I sat in this very studio that night with a bunch of young men from my son's high school, and there were 16, 17 of them, and we were up late. Trump, the election wasn't called until I think the 2 a.m. hour. And these guys, they didn't have to be a conservative or a Trump supporter to come here. Probably naturally, a lot of them just were. But when we called it for Trump, and I'm sure you saw this in your own world, but they weren't just like, yes, they were like this. Thank God. They were They were head in hands, like running their hands through their hair, like near tears. It was more than joy. It was like relief. Relief,
yeah. Well, could you imagine a 4-year term of Kamala Harris? And
no, but when I was
the LGBTQ crowd,
17,
oh my God.
These guys were that into it because they knew they had seen what happened, I think, to the class ahead of them and the one ahead of that and their older brothers and maybe their fathers, and that's why, to me, it's so crazy. You've got in our society now, Democrats throwing $20 million was in the New York Times this week, at trying to figure out the syntax to use to connect with young men. I'm like, you talk about being myopic. You don't have the first idea where you've gone wrong or how profound the loss is. You actually think you're going to be able to reach those boys with their heads in their hands in that sort of profound relief that Trump won by changing your syntax? Or we've seen some of these Democrat senators throw out a swear word here or there. Like, they have no idea the depths of the betrayal, I think, that these young men are feeling from those political leaders. And to me, that's the biggest divide right now, what the left has done to these young men. Not as much what just women. Yes, women, but also men of the left who have abandoned them, or at least gone along with these dominant women at the BLM protests and in corporate America preaching these things, because they can't find their balls to stand up for what they know is right and exercise, yes, maybe some toxic masculinity. Here and there, it's actually quite useful.